I've been won- I've been wondering about these fires in California, and they keep talking about this, and it seems like a ridiculous place to live and all. But I so I wanted to find out more about what's going on, and then potentially how people can, if they still want to live there, and they will, because it's a beautiful place. What they can do to harden their homes, or if the house already burned down, what they can do to have a house that might not be so combustible. So I want to talk. I will share, and then so here's California fires, and this is what I want to talk about. And fireproof construction, hopefully, if it's possible. So here's the big deal, and talk about the winds and such in California. And this Great Basin is where all this trouble begins. If you look at it, here's a basin. It's got all these little ranges in here, and there's a when a high pressure system develops in this area, it causes winds to go below, south and north of this mountain range, the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And it's kind of interesting. Here's the Santa Ana winds come down through the mountains, and from a high pressure to low pressure. There are two kinds. One Diablo north of this range, and Santa Ana winds south of the range. Why are they so dry? High pressure builds in the Great Basin. In the Basin desert starts out dry. During those cold months, the winds go from high to low pressure. Air is squeezed through mountain passes and speeds up and makes it warmer and drier. We're talking about the adiabatic temperature increase for every 1,000 feet, about 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So 15 to 20 degrees increase in temperature of the air that comes down the mountains from the mountains, and it's drier and drier as it goes. So here's the winds, the Santa Ana winds. The greatest impact happens to be where all the people are. Here's where all those people are, and that's where the Santa Ana winds come down. The Diablo winds, people are attracted to the windy areas, I guess. It's beautiful. So that's the problem. People are where these winds are. They build the houses. Here's the frequency of the Santa Ana winds during the months, 4 or 5 during the winter months, events during each month. They can last a few days, sometimes a week or longer. And so this is a setup for really windy conditions and dry air. And they always, like we have weather maps, they got fire maps out there, and it's got to be unnerving to live in a place where you have these fires going on, and it's just a disaster. Though I guess red cars are safe. I'm just joking. Okay. So basics of fire, fuel, oxygen, and heat equal fire. But then in this kind of environment, fuel, weather, topography is necessary to understand the fire behavior. What can you control? Fuel is the only thing that you can control. So that's vegetation, what your house is made of, trees, everything you've got around your house. That's kind of what you have to worry about, not just the basics of fire, but throw in weather and topography, and all you can control is the fire, is the fuel. And here's, the examples. A lot of this is mountainous areas. How do you control fire in an area like this? Well, you can do prescribed burns during the months where there are not a lot of winds. But it's really difficult to keep up to. And I know Tom Trites has had some experience in his youth dealing with biomass on around houses and such. But this is kind of what people see. And the big problem are embers that blow around. Um, and it's kind of leads to disastrous situations. Everything burns. I'm reminded of that movie, 2012, is it 2012 or I forget where it's and no, not that one. It's where the sun burns everything up. I forget the name of it. Oh, forget. Let's see. Does anyone know the name of that?
Knowing.
Knowing. Thank you. That's the one. Knowing. Anyway, it kind of looked like this at the end. So, what are the causes of how a house burns? This is how they test these things. They got ember ember machines, and oh, sorry, ember machines. They throw a house up and burn it up with embers. Contact, if broom leaning up against a house, stuff in the gutters, flame contact, and then radiant heat. The adjacent house is burning. Well, uh, your house is at risk because of the heat. Embers are the big problem. They are what cause most of the burned houses and buildings. One of they if you look at the situation on individual houses, how does this happen? Well, there are holes in the roofs. There are holes in the building, at the edges, next to. There are problem areas. Here's a window on the roof. They got venting and such. This is where a lot of the problems happen. You can imagine looking at these. I always think of wasp nests in these things. But there are places where embers can get in, and once they do, they can put house at risk. Um, Litter. My mother used to in Texas. She used to have me go up on her roof and sweep off, blow off all the needles from the conifers that were around her house, and I never really understood why. I think this is part of the reason she was worried about that because of fire risk. This stuff can catch with embers and cause a big problem. Uh, Gutters contain all sorts of stuff. And some of them are plastic. The plastic ones burn. I don't know which is better, metal or plastic. It seems like people can make choices. Some might be better than others. Roof skylights. This is a mess. It has to be cleaned off. How often do you get up on a roof to do that? It's necessary, and you can't do it when the fire's coming. You're too busy doing other things. Vents are a big problem. Embers can blow around under eaves, near foundations. Any pathway uh, can give you a potential problem. This is some pictures of embers in an attic during a firestorm, and so obviously it's a potential problem in just the vents that allow these things to come in. And they have all sorts of technologies on vents to do this to prevent embers. Holes big enough to allow air to move, but hopefully not the embers themselves. Uh, Places where stuff accumulate. We've seen this a little bit before, but it's where embers will light and set things on fire. Also, next to the houses, here's what looks like a flammable wall, and flammables next to the wall. Best is non-flammables and concrete or something like that, something that will not burn. Um, Yeah, I showed you a picture of a broom next to a building. That causes some potentially causes some problems. What better place to hide uh, firewood than under a deck? And then gaps, uh, gaps between cement and flammable surfaces. Again, firewood and keeping these areas clean is a problem because they look like natural storage places. Fences, just wooden fences that are attached to houses can easily burn unless they're metal. Of course, in this case, there's a lot of other stuff that'll burn and cause potential problems. So they talk about defensible space, and Tom was talking about this a few weeks ago, where they keep places clear, 0 to 5 feet right around the house, non-combustible. Zone 2, 5 to 30 feet, but you could have a neighbor's house on fire within that 5 to 30 foot area. But the idea is to keep this green and lean, they say, and then 30 to 100 feet out, reduced fuel zone. So if you can keep the fuel load down in those areas, it's better than nothing. If it might help your house situation. So they talk about non-combustible zones in that 0 to 5 foot area, but there's a conifer right here. I don't know if that looks like a big problem right there.
Yep.
But trees are beautiful. Go ahead. What was that? Okay. And then bushes, they don't look flammable, but it turns out in these areas they are. It's out. This is not necessarily a good idea. They look beautiful, but they're a problem potentially. Uh, the idea of fire-resistant plants, there really aren't any. Um, I guess you could have some that are small and less likely to be a source of fire next to the house. There are some choices that you can make, but it seems that just avoiding all plants pretty much might be the better way to go. Some of the worst situations, and we do a lot of this in Minnesota. I get bark. I get ground up, wood chips, and I put them around my areas. We just don't have that problem. You wouldn't get by very well in California. Pine needle mulch is kind of the worst case. So the idea is to have and rock or cement, something that won't burn. You can find pretty rocks, I guess. If your if your neighbor house goes up in that 5 to 30 foot zone, the obvious can happen and has. So you can talk about all the different areas around a house that need to have some thought. Multi-pane tempered glass. But if you have plastic surrounding them, maybe not. It's they're sources where hot fire can, once the windows break, it's kind of open. So I got a couple of little videos to show here. I think I got another one. This is interesting, and I'm only going to show a part of it. I'm going to show a part of about this house that was built. Tom Hanks' house is really a huge mansion. It also did not burn during this one fire, but we're going to take a look at a few minutes of this discussion of this particular house, which is brand new. So I'll start that. Okay, so he was talking, the two houses was the this one he just showed, and then Tom Hanks' house, which had some special characteristics as well, including a flat roof with rock on top, and so it was not flammable. So there have been other examples of after fires showing a few houses surviving. And in this case, I got another view of it. These three houses, they were made with this ICF. So they're foam and foam-filled blocks that are stacked. You can see some of them here. You stack them up, and then you fill them with cement as you go. I don't know how many times you fill it up with cement. I mean, I think it's done at least in a couple of layers. And then in a fire, all this foam has to be covered with siding anyway. But the siding, if the siding fails, the foam could melt, and but it's not combustible. And so but you'd still have walls. You'd still have cement walls. ICF, some reasons to do something like that. Temperature resistance, reduce flame spread, and it can self-extinguish, they claim. It's an effective fire barrier, energy efficient because there's insulation on both sides, and pretty safe. But this is an expensive thing, and um, it's not that much more expensive. Some people claim, the people who do it claim it's not that much more expensive than wood. But it's takes I believe it takes longer to install. But and then this is an example of an ICF building down in Florida. Katrina hit everything else, and this it seemed to survive. The structure seemed to survive, though the roof was ripped off. So there's more to it. It's can withstand winds, which they certainly have in Florida and in California. Uh, this is talks about a fireproof house, a really expensive one. Let's take a look. Okay, so if you had a few extra $1 million, you could build a house like that, but not everyone is able to do that. The more realistic situation and something one town really embraced was this. Now, that was an interesting way to address things, and then there have been other attempts to, before a fire comes, to maybe foam your house. And I can imagine in California all the complaints that there would be. I mean, all the regulations there would be, and spraying chemicals on your house. I don't, I really didn't follow up on that, but I saw some pictures of something like this, and it could work, I guess, in a pinch when the fire is coming. If you can have the wherewithal to do something like this, just foam your house. Uh, Seven, this is one list I came across, how, things for designing a more fire resistant house. And the first most important one is kind of funny because it's site selection. Um, and you don't you don't always have a choice. But the defensible space around the house, as far as you can get, making and then uh, making the external parts of the building fire resistant, dealing with vents properly, um, ensuring that there's enough water around if you decide to use uh, um, um, irrigation to try to take care of that. worrying about the proper ways to have glazing, the glass and the glazing for the glass, and then sprinklers or special equipment if you're going to do something like that. So there are systems where people are trying to come up with more resistant homes. So here's another one. We'll take a look at this. So there are all sorts of materials that can be used for the structure of the house. You notice in the last house, he used a lot of wood. So it isn't you don't have to use you don't have to not use wood, but you just have to keep it protected. Here's another strategy, and we've talked about this before. Um, and let me get into this 805 45.
Fire-resistant housing is more
845. Real short clip.
And then, but this obviously is done. And then the city inspectors were out here every day. The city official came out every 2 days, and then they were here at every step. And then this house already has the move-in permit, so it's pretty amazing to see how far our industry has become, even in the worst place to do this, which is California, which is also the place that needed it the most.
Yeah, especially right now.
Yes.
So permitting.
Okay, and then finally, I'll show you. There are all sorts of adaptations that can be made. For example, if a house with a lot of windows, it's a source of problems. You could change the windows, or you could put shutters over them. These are pretty cool looking shutters, I guess, but we'll see. Now, one of the things, you can imagine building a really nice house, but then there's a problem with in the fire areas with a lot of hills and valleys. Where do you build your house? You build it on the top of the hill or on the bottom of the hill, because after a fire, the soil gets unstable and will move on you. And some real extreme cases, here all these houses avoided the fire, but then the hill above them, the beautiful hill that they built the house for to see, besides the ocean, came down on them. And I got one cool little video I'll show of a house. And I'll show it again. Watch the materials that's coming down, because it's not mud, but this is because of it's called a mudslide. It's because of the mud underneath the house that's moving, and you don't see that. You just see all the dry material. Anyway, I thought that was a cool video to show. So I've thrown a lot of different ideas at you, and what maybe maybe there's some burning questions that you'd have. Let's just chat about this.
Hey, Jason, you're first.
Well, the knee-jerk reaction, Californians in general will be to place more regulations on the citizens imposed by. But what about regulations the other way around? Citizen imposed regulations on their own government. I think that forced mismanagement writ large in California, and the fact that there was no water in the fire hydrants.
That's politics, Jason.
Actually,
Well,
that wasn't true. It was a problem with the power grid.
there was no water in the fire hydrants. The
Bullshit.
excuse me, I believe it's my turn. There's no water in the fire hydrants. The fire departments themselves were mismanaged. The fire trucks did not respond early enough. The Californians' fire has been overloaded with combustible materials because there has not been controlled burns. And people have been saying this about California as a state writ large. We could talk about the winds, but we could also talk about how, because of a certain in protected species, we weren't able to do controlled burns. I do believe that smart building practices play a role here, but you need to start with infrastructure. And I believe that some of these, yeah, you could call it politics, but politics certainly does, failed politics has certainly played plenty of a role in this colossal failure as a state. And this may not be the popular thing to say, but it's true. And I'm sorry if some of you don't like to hear the truth, but I'm not going to shy away from it.
Jack, you next.
Yes, this is a question for Warren.
Yeah.
I mean, embers are definitely a huge threat, right, during
Right.
wildfire situation. I'm wondering if it's been proven that above ground electrical wires is also, a serious issue to be concerned with during high winds that actually cause the fires or originate from the fires, or is that just something that people talk about?
I think it's all sorts of things, but it doesn't matter where the fire begins, really. They're natural fires as well. And if you've got enough, if you got a spark on this dry stuff, I always remember my parents took us camping in California, and she showed us a piece of bread that was on a plate for a few minutes, and it had curled because it was so dry. It was just incredibly dry air. And, we're just not used to it out here. I mean, we'll have some droughty periods, but not low humidity like that. I mean, it's just, you have pine needles on the ground and a spark from a campfire, or lightning, which is where most of these things start, as I understand it. You know, and Tom Trites might have some different ideas about that. But yeah, they've blamed power lines for sure. But it doesn't matter because if your house is in the way of one of these things, it's got to be resilient in some way. Go ahead.
Dean.
Let me unmute. And, Jason, I love you, buddy, but I get irate when I'm reminded of how screwed up and unscrewed up California politics can be. And much of what I've lived this for 60 years, my friend, and much of what you said is true. We got 80-year-old water infrastructure because we do not spend money on it. But yeah, the hydrants were overwhelmed. Surprise, surprise. And another thing is that all these fireproof homes are great, and they are uber expensive in general. There are cheap ways to do it. And, regulation, you don't need government. You need an insurance company that says, oh, you just built a house where people should not be living. So we are not going to insure you. All the Hollywood people, they're self-insured. They don't care if their $8 million house burns down. They just build another one. And, my insurance rates are going up this year to pay for those people that live where people should not be living. And this is where we are right on, Jason, they need to assume the risk. I am not going to share that risk with you. And why should people in Minnesota, now they want government to come in and subsidize all of this insane building? Why should people in Minnesota pay for morons in California that choose to live where people should not be living? It kind of boils down to that. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. But yeah, you tweak me when you say California politics is, oh my God, it's like AI. It can be we're the tail that wags the dog of the country, and at the same time, you know, yeah. So anyway, all the above. Too many people living where they shouldn't be living. My insurance company comes out and makes us cut the trees because they overhang the roof. Well, where are the insurance companies? And there is a Poole for fire, and it's $100 billion bankrupt now. And Sacramento has chosen to assess everyone in California to make up that loss so that the insurance companies are blame proof. They can keep going. And somebody mentioned overhead wires, and that's why PG&E, which is the Northern California power line, that's why they went to jail, essentially convicted of felonies. SDG&E down here, and we've already had it many times, they just turn off the power to their high tension wires that are going to, and they notify everybody, and they said, break out your generators. We're going to kill your power today in the interest of safety. And that is what they do. And we have the most expensive electric rates in the nation, but at least they try to prevent this stuff down here in San Diego. But LA is LA. All right, I'll shut up.
Okay, I'm next. Some of what I was going to say kind of echoes what Dean just said. The power companies do cut off power when there's the threat of high winds that could bring power lines down, or when there's fires, which kind of hampers the fire efforts.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, so they're caught in the middle. Just personally, we used to have above ground power lines in my neighborhood. Excel came around and, I don't know, 10 years ago, buried all the lines in my area. My power used to go out briefly a couple times a year. Now it never does. So burying the lines is expensive at first, but it can be good in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another thing Dean said is absolutely correct. People like forests, so they build near forests.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem, because that's what catches fire, and fires spread from the forests, especially the ones that are east of where most people live. The winds are blowing everything from east to west. One final thing is mudslides were mentioned, especially near the end there. When the vegetation is burned down, then and the rains come and thankfully put out the fires, then they soak the ground and mudslides happen. And that's another thing when people like to build near hilly forests. They're at threat to mudslides, especially after a fire. And so they get hit with a double whammy.
But and responding to that, part of that is the real bad mudslides happen when, after a long period of time, biomass accumulates. And this is why frequent fires are really more important, but we're always putting out these fires. The fires need to be encouraged and controlled when they can be.
Right.
I think the fire departments should be out there, not during the fire season, but during, controlling the biomass out there, because they've got the equipment to slow these things down if they get out of hand. Because when there are 1,000 houses at risk, there's no number of fire trucks that could be made available to handle it, because it just overwhelms them. It will always overwhelm the fire departments.
Okay, Jack, you're next.
Okay, so again, a question for Warren. Well, let me just kind of briefly go over the situation. So I have a family member that had the same insurance company. She lives in California. Had the same insurance company for the last 20 years, never an issue. And then just within the last month, the insurance company sent her a cancellation letter, maybe due to the latest fires, in Los Angeles. But essentially, they said that the wildfire risk model score for her home was 28. Normal is 0 to 20, and then extremely high would be 61 to 100. They said hers was 28. Again, 20 years, never an issue, right?
Mhm.
I'm wondering, is it possible to lower your wildfire risk score to be more appealing to insurance companies, to do, for them to cover your home currently? Like, taking into account some of the small maintenance items that you mentioned during the presentation, do they take that into account, or do they not care?
Good
And they're more
question.
interested in the area that the house is near when it comes to wildfire risk score model score?
Yeah, one of those videos showed that the man's house, which was partly built of wood, and he had sprinklers on his roof and such, but he had gained uh, some sort of rating uh, and I'm not sure if that was from the government or from an insurance company, that that made it possible. I think made it possible for him to have insurance, where I don't know if his neighbors would or not. But yeah, that's a good question. Can you do insurance companies do that? My experience with insurance companies, and someone mentioned a limbs from a tree over their house, and the insurance company had told them to get it down. Usually, they don't want to deal with you um, until the branch falls on your house. And you'd think that they would say, well, hey, we'll kick in a couple $100 for that, $1,000 limb removal if you get that thing removed. And it would save them money, you would think, but that's not how they think. That's interesting. It's an interesting problem. I've removed a lot of huge trees in my yard because they're attacking my house. But the insurance company doesn't pay anything for that. It's like they can't figure that out.
Dean.
The last time I checked, people that go into the insurance business are not rocket scientists. Yeah. Um, they're great bean counters, unbelievable bean counters. And yeah, all that I just heard is true. Um, and what some communities are doing, and not necessarily wealthy people, is they're creating their own little fire department that will defend their neighborhood, like a HOA or something, and doing that. And yes, the sprinklers are you can have a stick-built home with defensible space. And, this is on the news every third day during fire season in California. Defensible space. Does insurance companies, do they enforce that? No, not well enough. And yeah, and your relative that it's an actuarial numbers game. Oh, she's a 28 on a scale of 1 to 20 is safe. Well, go after the people that are 68 and above, And yeah, and Jason is 100% correct. State government can be more of an impediment than a help. They can be both. And the controlled burns and the hoot owls and all that, a whole lot of that is true, but I'm an animal lover first. I think that the forests belong to the animals, and we should be able to go there and visit the animals. But if you want to live there, you have to do it in a responsible way. And insurance companies can enforce that, building codes can enforce that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yep.
But I understand insurance companies have pulled out of California. Some of them have. I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
many have. Oh, lock, stock, and barrel. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the insurance. It's easy to beat on the insurance companies, but they have to a certain extent, act in their own self-defense. If the our insurance company, I think it's every 5 years they come by and walk around, and we get a little note saying this tree is more leaning than it used to be, and they'll have photographs showing that it's edging towards the house, and they don't offer to pay for it,
Mhm.
but they do have a list we can access of people who apparently they think have done good work that we can access, and we've always been happy we're starting with their list and getting estimates. But buried lines can have problems that are less obvious. My brother's PhD is in power transmission, and he says burying it is safer, but it's much more expensive to inspect. If it's out there on a pole, I can drive by with the binoculars and see if it's all pretty much in good shape.
You can drive by with a drone. That's what we do here.
Yeah, you do with it. Yeah, he says, if it's all buried, I don't know what's happening down there. It shouldn't be anything happening.
Yeah,
If
and
we did
burying
it right.
earthquake zones might be a problem too.
Yeah, if earthquake zones or road construction nearby.
Yeah.
Or the state coming by and putting in strengthened highway beds, which are heavier than the expected overtopping load on the tubing. And he has a cute little robot he can send down tunnels. I used to use a rat. It just, if the rat could get through, I knew there was connection from one end to the other. And if Charlie came back out and wanted cheese, I knew that there was something broken in the way. But this is a battle. There isn't any other way to think of it. No, that's not true. There are many ways to think of it. Thinking of it as a slow motion, ongoing battle against the world falling down is a successful way. The trees, the elm tree is going to go on anyway. The ash tree is going to have to go, and it's going to be $2,000 probably by the time we're done.
Yeah.
But having them fall in the house would be a lot more expensive.
Yeah, it's $8,500 or $10,000 to get our 60-foot tree out. We pay $1,500 every 2-3 years to get it thinned out so that it won't kill me while I'm sleeping in my bedroom. Yep.
Yeah,
$2,000
but
for 2 trees is cheap.
the power, the idea that they did not have in California above ground storage tanks filled, feeding those hydrants, that they depended on active pumping to put water into a hydrant, is just mind-boggling. Gravity doesn't fail. I'm sorry, gravity could fail, but if it does, fires are going to be a small problem. I just,
No, that sounds like that was a maintenance issue, and they have to do it sometimes. So they could always choose a better time.
yeah. So you choose to shut down one block. You don't choose to shut down the county, which seems to be what happened.
The reservoir was a big one, and for fire handling. But the deal is, you're always going to be in a situation where there's not enough equipment and your house is on.
Yeah, and what you want to do is you make it hard for fire to attack your house.
Yep.
Make it easy to defend your house. Do the anticipatory things so you don't have the disaster.
Yeah, And you still might, because
And yeah, you still will.
you might.
Okay,
But if
Stan.
you
We got a
next,
offer from State Farm regarding our house to install this product called King, which is a module that you just plug into the wall. And what it does is it monitors electronic and current performances in the house and alarms. And it's connected to a Wi-Fi. It's
Oh.
got the service is taken care of for us by State Farm. We get a weekly report with graphs showing our power consumption and everything. And they claim that if there's any kind of a short somewhere in a switch or in a socket or something like that, it'll be able to detect it and monitor the fire department to come check our house or have the service people come and check our house in case of a problem.
But
That's State Farm, and I think it's voluntary and it's free. That's
Okay.
in the Twin Cities.
Can I ask, do you know if a ground fault interrupt would trigger it?
The only thing they told us is that the socket that we were supposed to plug it into shouldn't be a ground fault. And that so the socket I put it into is near the Wi-Fi, so it's a good connection there. And it's not a ground fault type socket.
Well, I've got a ground fault fuse that keeps tripping, and I've had an electrician look at it, and they can't find any problem. It's just and I've replaced the ground fault fuse. Uh,
This product name is called Ting, and
Yeah.
obviously you can decide for yourself if you want to get involved with them. The service is available, but we were just offered it from State Farm for free. So they apparently saw it as being a reasonable cost to insure against a preventable fire.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, Dean and then Carol.
Yeah, so nothing is free in California. And who mentioned the undergrounding? SDG&E. And had I listened to my financial advisor 60 years ago, I would have bought stock in SG&E, SDG, because they paid the highest dividends. He said, if you own this amount of stock in SDG&E with their high dividend rate, you will never pay an electric bill or gas bill again in your life because your stock will pay for it. But yeah, I do love Stan. He thinks Silicon Valley has the answer to everything. They have an answer to a lot of things. But yeah, all that above is true. Now I got myself off track as I usually do.
Are you saying buried lines are good?
Well, here's the deal on SDG&E. We gave them a huge rate increase decades ago in the 90s, let's say. Huge. And they said, we pledge, they didn't sign it in writing, that we're going to underground all of the power in the city of San Diego. It's doable. And that was 2000 they were going to do it. And then they said, well, maybe 2010. Well, it's 2025, last time I checked, and not 3% has been undergrounded. I still got the ugly telephone poles in my backyard because they're very easy to maintain. SDG&E comes down and trims the trees that are conflicting with our power lines and all that. But it ruins my sunset views. But oh well, I've gotten used to them, right? Just like people get used to windmills in their backyard. The answer to power is have much less transmission from afar, and you do it locally, and that can be done. You can build a neighborhood with solar, etc., reclaimed water for irrigation. It's very, very doable. It's called communism, as in we group together, and they have built communities like that where they're essentially self-sustaining. with solar and whatever. That can be done, and it's not that expensive.
Carol,
You're muted, Carol.
And there we go. Now, can you hear me?
yes.
Yep.
Okay. Now, Dean, you live in San Diego?
I have lived in San Diego for 60 years.
Okay. And you're talking about places where people shouldn't live. And I am reminded of the time very long ago, late 70s, early 80s, where I lived in San Diego for a few years. And I became interested in fire problems, earthquake problems, etc., etc. And I was a computer programmer, and JPL was putting ads in all the local papers saying they wanted programmers to come to work for them to do the to do the work analyzing the photographs that were coming back from way out probes, the ones that were going to,
Like
Jupiter,
Voyager.
Saturn, that kind of thing. Dream job, absolute dream job. And so I started looking at, I could apply for that job. I could move to someplace close to JPL. Then I discovered that the San Andreas Fault, which doesn't much bother San Diego, it actually comes down and goes out to sea north of San Diego. But the San Andreas Fault goes through the parking lot at JPL. And I thought, okay, maybe that's a place where people shouldn't live. Then I discovered that, and this may have changed, I mean, this was many years ago, but at that time, the entire water supply for San Diego crossed the San Andreas Fault. So I'm thinking, well, maybe San Diego isn't such a safe place for people to live.
That's not completely true. We do have the Colorado River, what's left of it. We get some water from there, but for the most part, you are right.
Well, as I said, it may have changed. How long ago was the 80s?
San Andreas Fault hasn't moved.
No, but I was thinking of the water supply. In other words, it's easy for you to sit in San Diego and say those people shouldn't live in forest fire areas. But here are all these things where maybe people shouldn't live in San Diego.
Well, I don't have earthquake insurance. It's unaffordable,
Yeah.
even down here. For people like me that aren't crazy about Silicon Valley, just hang around for 100 years because it goes right across a dam, a huge reservoir that will probably kill 100,000 people when that thing cuts loose. Passaic Lake, whatever, I forget what it's called.
Well, and then I look at Minnesota and much of the Midwest and tornado damage every year.
and worse every year in many, many places.
So are there places where people should live?
Mars, according to Elon Musk.
Yeah, the insurance situation for hurricanes in Florida is probably similar to the situation in Southern California for fires.
Yeah. I have also lived in Florida, St. Petersburg, for short amounts of time. Wouldn't stay there.
Okay, H. Tom. You're muted, Tom.
GFCI problems. GFCI problems can kill you. They are not a game. If
What
you have
GFCI?
ground fault interrupted circuitry.
Ground fault circuit interrupter.
Yeah. If you are having problems with a GFCI outlet, there are basically three possibilities. One is that it's incorrectly installed. They can be incorrectly installed and this go unnoticed for decades. Second problem is that it has a bad ground connection somewhere along the line. If you could, the third possibility is that the device has failed. You can take it out, check that all the screws are tight. If the problem persists, take it out, replace it.
I have.
And if the problem continues, call a real electrician.
Yeah, I had an electrician look at it, and the solution, it's on a bunch of ceiling lights. And the only solution I've come up with for it to stop tripping is to take out half the light bulbs.
Replace them with LEDs if you can.
Recent construction, and they are LEDs. They don't have conventional lights in those. They're LEDs.
Call another electrician. Should not be, absolutely should not be happening. There's a problem.
Doesn't happen anymore.
Oh, okay.
Because I took the light bulbs out.
Yeah. I'll send you our electrician. He's called the Barefoot Electrician. He works out of PB. And we saw the name Barefoot Electrician. They go, that's the guy I want. And he is very, very good.
Yeah.
But
And he practices in San Diego?
Yeah, he does San Diego. He's a young ex-hippie or second generation hippie. But yeah, that he does it where he doesn't. What he means is he knows his stuff. As in, I could do this stuff barefoot. I go, well, really? Yeah, I've been there, done that.
Don't send him to Minnesota in the winter.
Carol, are you done, Carol?
Yes.
Okay, Jason.
I've been studying disaster off and on my whole life since I was a teenager. And I hesitate to say this, but I guess I would consider myself to be an amateur survivalist. There's no place you can live on the planet Earth that's going to be disaster-free, whether it's earthquakes, wildfires, snowstorms and blizzards, hurricanes. Really, there's no safe zone. There are zones of safety from particular disasters, but there are always going to be disasters that you don't plan for that you are vulnerable to. Nobody can plan for everything, is what I've learned. Right now, I don't say this to brag, but I could stop visiting the grocery store until I'm 100 years old, and I have enough food to last me the rest of my life. But I know how to treat gunshot wounds. I know how own tourniquets and I know how to use them. I know how to treat radiation sickness. I know how to modify HVAC systems to protect against gamma radiation. I could tell you 1,000 different things and go on for days, if not weeks, on how to prepare or protect yourself. But the fact is that things like insurance is just there in case you fail in some aspect. You know, there are dozens of things that people don't even think about, don't even know which questions to ask, to be worried about. And so there's a finite of futility in all of this because we are human, and even if we plan, there will be blind spots and we will forget things. But I find this presentation very interesting because it talks about embers, and it forced me to think about some things that I hadn't thought about previously, like plastic gutters. The University of Minnesota had something called the Underground Space Design Center in the 80s, earth sheltered housing, basically, which was a trend in the late 70s and early 80s. I found it interesting because it not only protected against things like wildfires, and it made energy efficient sense because heating and cooling your house is the most energy intensive thing power wise, but it also protected you and your family against things like gamma radiation because soil and concrete is a great insulator against things like radiation. Also, tornadoes. If your house is underground, well, your house is one big storm cellar. I'm still convinced that earth-sheltered housing. I bought many of the books that exist on earth-sheltered housing for that reason. One of the things that I like to do as a hobby in passing is anytime there's a large hurricane or wildfire, I will study the houses that survived that disaster and look at the specific design elements that contributed to its survival. If I was to live in the Philippines, for example, I would build houses that specifically were designed to resist hurricanes. With Minnesota, you have to worry about snow and snow loading on the roof. The A-framed houses, which I grew up in, are a great design element to prevent too much load-bearing snow or ice accumulating on the roof. It really depends on where you live and what threats are the most probable for that area. But again, there are plenty of potential disasters that people give no thought to whatsoever. For example, if a hydrogen bomb was to explode, certainly that could create a lot of fires, but it would also destroy a lot of the glass, even if it was thermally insulated or thermal paned glass, and allow all those embers to go inside the house because people like windows. So landslides, a lot of people don't consider.
Seriously, Jason.
Anyway, I'll shut up. I could go on for weeks, like I said.
Okay, Dean, again.
Dean again. Let me unmute. Jason, we need to get a private channel because time permitting, I would love to hear you for weeks. Because you're a smart guy. My brother and I and his son Richard is like a son to me. We all have this same weird survivalist thing, as in if I had a little bit more money, I might retire in a missile silo in Minot, North Dakota. Yeah, and yeah, I mean there is that, and I do understand that. In Minnesota, when people started in the 50s, people started building fallout shelters. We had neighbors that built them, and our philosophy was duck and cover in the hallway like this, and but yeah, I will remind you guys. I checked my birth certificate. It had a California Prop 65 warning. Life is dangerous. There are no guarantees, and that's that. That's just a fact. We are mortal. Yep. I'll shut up. Tom wants to talk.
Just briefly, Jason reminded me of something back in the 80s when we were I was designing our next house. I really was interested in earth sheltered homes. But a lot of municipalities kind of have ordinances, regulations that do not allow you to do that. They don't
Yeah.
like them for some reason. So, and it would have been pretty expensive. So I built a house, designed a house and located a house to take to be energy efficient and take do passive solar design. So it would, heat in the winter and cool in the summer kind of naturally. But beyond that, earthburn was very interesting because it has lots of advantages. There were some disadvantages. You had to be very careful about water and that kind of thing leaking in, but they can be designed so that works. But that's one possible solution, as Jason mentioned, to these a lot of disasters like fires and hurricanes and so forth. Another one I was interested in was geodesic domes. But there are even more regulations against them, I think, in a lot of places. So in a way, to make neighborhoods look nice, municipalities kind of go against what might be the best construction ideas for that area, depending on what kind of disasters or weather you might get there. So you're fighting a couple things, your safety, efficiency, regulations or whatever, so it looks nice. So it's and then of course insurance can be pretty fickle too. So there's a lot you have to consider when you're building a house. Tom, you're next.
Oh, if removing a bulb from a fixture fixes the short problem, there's a wiring fault somewhere along the line. It doesn't have to be in the fixture itself. It could be in an outlet. It could be in any number of places, but the GFCI is kicking in because it's found a ground fault. And that needs to be fixed because they can be sparks inside of all the protective barriers. So get an electrician. Don't just take the bulb out.
Appreciate
Not that you shouldn't take the bulb out, but that's indicative of there being an actual problem.
Yeah, the frustrating thing about this is a new construction.
Well, the old penny under the fuse worked in a pinch, but it's not a great idea.
And there's a period, I think, in the 80s when a lot of the electrical wiring was aluminum rather than copper, which is not a good idea.
My house was built in 1904. There's a lot of aluminum.
Wow, 1904. Well, aluminum is fine if the connections are done properly. It's the connection between aluminum and copper, etc. I mean, all the high tension wires are aluminum, but that's a different animal.
Yeah, this is new construction and it was new wiring to that, not incorporated with the aluminum at all.
Hey, Jason, were you done?
I'm sorry. Yeah, no. Obviously, I talked enough. I talked too much as it.
Okay, Stan.
I got two things. You just reminded me of a new story, but we've been driving around a lot in the evening times just for fun of it around the Nicollet and the river along the river and so forth. And we noticed that none of the street lights were on. And I did some checking, and there've been people stealing the copper out of the street lights. And apparently the solution that they've come up with is to switch that out with aluminum and make it well known that it's aluminum, and don't bother stealing it because you're not going to get the same rate from your local mafia pay plan on your copper, on all your copper. My other story is anybody remember a department store called Ardennes back in the 60s? ARD Ardennes or RD, yeah, I think it's ARDN, DAN. There was one in Ames, Iowa. This is when I lived in Jefferson, Iowa, and I think it was in the early 60s. We took a drive, and I saw my first fallout shelter. It was a mock-up display of a fallout shelter on for sale in the department store.
Uh,
That I never forgot about that. They had the tubing going up to the surface, and they had the shanty, kind of the semi, kind of a cylinder style construction. And I think they had cutaways so you could see some of the interior features and so forth. So yeah, interesting stuff.
did they have a manual blower for air exchange?
I think I was probably 12. I'm not sure I was sharp enough to be looking for details like that, but probably did, yeah.
Hey, Dean, you're next.
Yeah, we had a neighbor that one or two in our neighborhood on Culver Road, Golden Valley, that actually built one, and it was a great playhouse. You know, we'd go down there and play in the shelter, and I think they were a family of 4, and they had food down there. But yeah, it was fun. It was like a treehouse in reverse, you know. And yeah, we had a lot of fun. All right, first of all, you guys are talking about ground wires. What the hell is a ground wire? You know, my house was built in 1947, 48. There ain't no, it's all 2-wire cloth. You know, the only grounded circuits are the ones my brother and I put in the kitchen, etc. So yeah, and GFCI and AFCI, the other one, a lot of times now they put every breaker. So the whole breaker box. That's what we built in Kansas, in my Missouri, in my sister's farmhouse, and it's all Leviton GFCI, which is great. I had a great lesson on GFCI when I was there in my motorhome helping the house get built, and the barn was built first, and I put in 2 20 amp circuits, right? 2 separate 20 amp circuits in the garage of the barn. And I had my motorhome, which requires 30 amp. So I said, oh, I can do this. I've done it with welding. I've done a 30 amp welder 80 feet away from the house or 60 feet away with 2 20 amps, combined them. That works great. Well, I spent hours up on ladders, putting in this thing, getting it out through the wall to my motorhome. I go, all right, here we go. And I flipped it on, and one or the other GSI says, boom, because I wasn't drawing to the milliamp, the same amperage on the 2 circuits. And he said, well, you're not sending back 99.99% of what I'm giving you. Therefore, you're out of business. And so I canceled that idea.
Warren.
Yeah.
Do you have more to present on your topic?
No, that's it. Unless someone asked about water.
Because we're getting a little bit off of that topic. So
Yeah, that's no problem. I'm to the end of it. I only had one other video about the water situation in California, but I think it's.
Oh, please! I want to hear it. Yeah.
Do I hear it?
okay, let's hear from H. Tom, and then we'll go on to that.
Okay.
World War II horror story. The dormitory I lived in the 70s had a sub-basement. And we got instructions one day that all of the first aid and survival stores in this sub basement were to be removed and hauled off to a local military facility for destruction. Well, we kept one of the 5-gallon tins of crackers just out of curiosity and opened it. First, they stank. And we tried to eat them, but that did not go well. I tried to make them into a soup, and I think that actually was even worse. So we just put them in the next load.
Okay.
Processing and packaging for that stuff is better now. Why don't we go, Warren, why don't you do your last video and then
All
we'll
right.
take the rest of the questions.
Okay. All right. So this is about the water system, and I also have a little bit about a dam, but I don't think we need to see that. That's a problem that's it was just a little blurb that says, "Hey, there's water problems," but it's political. So what do you do?
Yeah, let's see. My hand's up to a couple others.
Yeah, go
Uh, the water problems have been around for 200 years. There's cattle versus sheep. There was a lot of different things that involve water that end up being political. And protected species is one of them, but it's not the only one. And basically, Southern California shouldn't be as highly populated as it is because they don't have good access to fresh water. They have to steal it from the Colorado River or whatever. They wanted to steal it from the Great Lakes. That's always going to be a problem in that part of the country. So I don't think there's a really a good way to get around it. There's a lot of different factors they have to weigh when they decide who gets water because there just isn't enough.
Well, and it just emphasizes the fact that you cannot expect to have water everywhere when you need it. And for, they talk about the hydrants. Well, if there are 1,000 homes that need a hydrant functioning, all at once, there aren't enough fire departments to deal with it anyway. So the home resilience has to be at the base of all of this.
In fact, there was a time a few decades ago when San Diego was trying to discourage people from coming there, if I recall, because they felt there were enough people there already. Did you find that, Dean?
I did not.
I would have closed the gates a long time ago, but it's not up to me. And yeah, when it comes to water,
You froze up.
whatever. Am I muted? No, that
You
could,
froze up. You froze up.
What?
It's okay now.
I don't know. I'm not muted. So they had groundwater and they could pump their own water. And then the Indians, brown Indians, bless their hearts, came in with their gambling billions and sucked the water table down by 1,500 feet. Same thing in the San Joaquin Valley. They have sucked all of the water out of that water table, which, by the way, is increasing earthquakes. Sucking the water table down helps spawn earthquakes. So, yeah, it's just so when it comes to little fish versus people and water, I am of the opinion that humans are the worst invasive species on the planet. It's as simple as that. The little fish were around millions of years before us, and there's just too many of us. And I don't know how you solve that. Well, I know how, but most people don't want to entertain the idea of thermonuclear war. I'd take my chances at my age, but yeah, that's just me.
Okay, we have 3 more hands up. Jason?
again, we've got certain, whether they're environmental groups or activist groups that put the survival of little fishes over the survival of our own species. We've got political problems that contribute to ecological problems and lawsuit problems. And, you know, if there's, are the question he asking that don't put the survival of little fishes above the needs and survival of the human species? Are there states that don't have the types of infrastructure problems or common sense problems when it comes to these destructive wildfires? Are there states that do it better? Are there governments and regulatory agencies that do it better? And studying all this stuff my entire life, I've seen one convincing, overwhelming factor, and that is, a lot of you don't want to hear this, but conservative run states and environments don't generally suffer these types of problems to the degree that places like California do, which is why millions and millions of people have moved out of places like California to places that are managed with more common sense. And so a lot of it depends upon where you live. Are you going to live in a state that has a conservative run government that doesn't tolerate these types of lapses in judgment? That's all I have to say. That's all that can be said.
Well, if you look
Yeah,
outside the
real
United,
quick, Colorado is an example, I think, which is now a purple state. And I think Colorado does a much better job of fire risk management and everything than California does.
if you look outside the United States, probably the best run country in the world is Finland. They're best in many, many measures. Education,
Homelessness.
income, quality of life, and so forth. So there are examples we can look toward to do things better. David, go ahead.
We have to say again, it's complicated, but it really does. Thanks, Dean. Is this better? Can you hear me? No. Okay.
Well, slightly.
Slightly.
Out.
There's a book called The Power of Positive Deviance that I would recommend, looking at places that do things better. But it's also a question of abundance. How much can we afford? And there are going to be cost-benefit trade-offs.
Okay, H. Tom.
Books about California, published in 1840 by Richard Dana. It's called 2 Years Before the Mast. It's mostly a story of sailing from New York to California and back again on a ship in the 1830s. But he spends almost a year in California wandering around. And the California he describes is so different than the California that's there now, except that it has droughts and floods and fires and a couple of thousand Mexicans raising cattle. It's a fascinating difference of how we can change a place, not better, not worse, just change. As far as saving the little fishies, I think it's important to save the little fishies, not because we need to save the little fishies, because it means that we're screwing up our environment. And we're just the big fish. And when the little fish are gone, we're next on the menu. So we have to save the little fishies. Now, the way California does it is entirely screwed up, but we have to protect the little fishes and the little minks
They're like
and the big mice
gold mine.
and all of it, because I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on my living in the Tetons binge. I'll stop.
It's called bellwether species, canary in the gold mine. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Stan.
Coming from a more conservative state to a more liberal state, I just want to claim that the benefits of living in a state where there's more criticism of government control is much more beneficial than living in a state where conservatism basically doesn't allow for a discussion about issues that need to be talked about. And so I think the transparency and being aware of problems is better than the clamping down on discussions about how things could be done and should be done. Would be an issue that needs to be discussed. And that's kind of what I see happening with this new administration, is they're trying to solve a problem by making sure that the people that point these problems out are somehow not allowed to talk about it. And so I think that's my concern. And I'm saying that with personal experience living in small towns in Iowa under conservative rule, mostly churchy, and there is that barrier to discussion that happens. And I think that it's preferable to be where it's open discussion that's civil and rational, but also productive.
Dean, you're next.
To me, they're not. If you count live, I have lived in Florida. I have lived in Texas. If you count 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months over a period of time, and so my answer is, and that's why I'm a radical centrist, neither extreme left nor right is the best way. Period. Something in between. Did I enjoy living in Florida, where I could get off work in the afternoon, go through a drive-through with a state trooper behind me, and get a drive-through margarita to safely sip on the way back to my hotel? I enjoyed that freedom. I did, because I lived in Texas in the old days when the cowboys could drive. There was no open container law. You could drink a beer and you could chuck it in the back of the truck, and they did, and I've seen it, but they had very strict drunk driving. And if that cop thought you were drunk, you're going to pay a hefty fine. Texas, also a pretty conservative state, last time I checked. They have very, very strict, right under California probably, littering laws, as in $1,000 fine and up. And that they're saying is, don't mess with Texas. And so anyway, you can take good elements from the liberals and from the conservatives, and you can combine them. It's like mixing your Kool-Aid to make your own, and it tastes better.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up. Do you have some kind of summary or anything you'd like to give us? Warren, you're muted.
No, that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening. I just wanted to jump into it and learn a little bit more about why they have these fires, and why I don't have to worry about it here in Minnesota.
And
So
I've learned to kind of just tune it out at my age, but yeah, I've literally lived this stuff for 60 years, and
So you concentrated mostly on home building construction,
Right.
which is preventing property damage. We didn't talk a whole lot about mitigating the incidents of fires themselves, but what to do in case there is one. So
Well, I don't think I think it's such a natural, you're in an environment there where it's going to happen no matter what you do. I mean, there are natural fires that happen. And then you throw in people and then you got more fires. But I think one of our biggest problems has been uh, stopping fires when they're necessary. You stop them long enough, the more biomass there is out there, the hotter the fire is. And then everything is worse after that.
Yeah, okay. Two hands, Dean.
So here's a dirty little secret, and it's political, and boy, is it political in California, the homeless issue, because we import all of the homeless from the country. We have 25% of the homeless or something. And they have already arrested 10 people. Most of the small fires, one was a leftover firework ember thing, that was the Altadena. But the other one, small, that they managed to put out, they have traced back to homeless encampments, people living where they're not supposed to live. And they had their sterno going or whatever happened. And yeah, so that's a real problem. I feel for them. I understand it. And now they're building more parking places. And they're opening 265 camping spots on some property. They all have phones. They're on their phones all the time. That information is instantly relayed all over the country. Come to San Diego and hurry up because you can live here for free. And yeah, it's political, but it's societal.
Well, it's the climate also. They're not going to freeze to death in the winter.
Yeah, well, why would you want to be homeless? I used to see them in Minneapolis sleeping on the grates on Nicollet Avenue. I go, really, dude? We have railroads. Why don't you hop a freight and go to California or Arizona or someplace? Yeah, I feel for them.
Yeah, the problem is homeless. What do you do with them? They have to live somewhere.
Well, in the old days, when I was a kid, we had poorhouses and workhouses. And the poorhouses were, and if you took a 2025 version of a poorhouse workhouse, kind of like Father Joe Carroll does here, and, get them into treatment, get them, kind of productive, treat them very humanely, house them, it would be much, much cheaper. My stepfather retired from the Sonoma State Mental Hospital, and great job. And we had a fantastic state. And for the 50s, 60s, it was pretty humane. We took care of people. They had a beautiful 40 acres up there. And yeah, and it's way cheaper to take care of people in that way than to leave them on the street. There is one guy that has called 911, I think 15 or 18 times in 1 year at $2,000 a pop of taxpayer money. You just give him the $70,000 a year and tell him, go rent yourself an apartment, man, get a bedroom. It would be much, much cheaper than doing the way we do it.
Tom.
Oh, I just wanted to comment that we do have forest fires here in Minnesota. Big, huge, horrible ones that we have no hope of doing anything about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the big blowdown up north hasn't caught on fire yet, right? 20.
Yet.
Yeah.
But you guys don't have canyons and the Santa Ana winds that were so greatly pointed out. We're living in a place where people probably shouldn't live. No water, fire prone, and earthquakes. Do the math.
To do controlled burns in these areas that had huge blowdowns now before it becomes a major problem? Or should we just wait and be like California and let nature take its course? I think we should do zoned controlled burnings.
Well, you haven't lived here for 60 years. They were doing a lot of prescribed burns.
Yes.
And a couple of the pretty major wildfires were a controlled burn gone wrong. Well, stuff happens, right? And yeah, no, it is. Yeah, we've totally mismanaged our forests. I 100% agree. People have been screaming about that, the Sierra Club, for a century. And I mean, the Native Americans, they know how to do it. Oh, lightning, boom, control burn, great. The forest will be healthy. The acorns will be on the ground, and we'll be happy. And yeah, they lived with fire.
Well,
You know,
it's
there
not
are many,
political.
many species that have to have fire. They cannot reproduce without fire. They evolved with wildfire.
I get that it's not politically correct to give Donald Trump credit for anything, but he's been pushing since his first administration to get these forest management practices under control and do more prescribed burns. Nobody ever says anything about that. There are politicians out there that are trying to get headway, but they run into all these environmental groups that push against it. And so, you know, it's not like there aren't other people with common sense like myself advocating for this stuff, but we just never talk about it.
Well, let's talk about Donald Trump being in love with Russia and China and hating everyone else. But that's
Let's not
another
talk
side to
about
politics.
Donald Trump at all.
Let's go on. Stan, I think you're next. Tom, were you done?
I just have a question. This is kind of off topic, but it's not political per se. Well, it is kind of. But has anybody heard anything today about this no purchase yesterday kind of situation? People were being asked not to make purchases yesterday, whether it had any effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, no, it was a big deal out here. And I had a friend who just got back from the Philippines, and he said, "What the heck? You know, I'm not supposed to shop on Friday." I did screw up, and I did go to Costco, but because today is, you know, I used to go today, but Costco is a union shop, not clothes shop, but they're represented by the Teamsters Union. They pay their employees very well. People retire from Costco. It's a great job and all that. But yeah, no, the big one coming up, and I haven't heard any more about it, is 30 days of Amazon free. In other words, where you go 30 days without buying a single thing from the bald-headed guy. And
I just wondered, does anybody have anything to report about the results of that particular day yesterday? Maybe it's too early. Have we heard anything about whether it was made a difference or whatever?
Well, it doesn't matter. They shop the day before and they'll shop the day after and make it's like having the stores closed on a holiday. You know, what any impact? I don't know. It's a social statement, right?
Yeah, they're trying to make a statement, and I don't know if anyone heard it. So
I don't think
it's largely symbolic. It's largely symbolic. It's the people mistakenly believe that the problem is capitalism. The problem is not capitalism. The capitalism just happens to be the best of the worst systems out there. It's I don't see if we got rid of capitalism tomorrow, would that really change anything? I mean, would it really
Jason,
solve
you're so black and white. There is good enlightened capitalism and there is evil capitalism.
I agree.
Okay, I know you do.
okay, let's get beyond the politics. I think David wants to talk about next week or something.
Yep.
Actually, I wanted to ask Stan if he wanted to talk about next week. We haven't posted the topic.
Oh, Stan, are you supposed to speak next week?
Am I already scheduled?
Yeah, you've been scheduled for the last month. I'm sorry, I
Okay.
didn't ask you earlier than this.
Well, I've got something prepared. I can tell you that I do have something prepared. It's basically geothermal. It's an energy resource, geothermal, and there's a couple of different plans to do it. One of them basically gives the oil companies a chance to use some of their assets for drilling, but for different reasons than just extracting fuel.
Yep.
So I can go forth with that one.
Okay, could you post that on the meetup site?
If you'll send me
Or
something.
you're able to or not?
I'll just transfer it to David and he can take care of the meetup site.
Okay.
Thank you.
Another topic that might be of interest, especially with current events, is nuclear fusion power. China's made big strides in it recently, and something just happened recently in California. Maybe it's at Lawrence Livermore or something like that, where they had a reaction sustained over 20 minutes or something like that. So they're making real progress there. That might be an interesting topic for somebody.
Which containment system are they using? Was that
I don't know. Kind of a tokamak type thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it would have to be a tokamak because inertial confinement doesn't last that long, I don't think. They're instantaneous.
I think the impressive thing had to do with the California emissions. I'm sorry, the ignition center. But nuclear has one big flaw that we haven't talked about. It's a 93 million mile safety factor. What could go wrong here?
What could go wrong with the sun? I'm not
What
sure.
could go wrong trying to duplicate the conditions on the sun here on Earth?
That would be an
David,
interesting part of a topic when we discuss fusion.
David, I think I'm up next. Is there a way to create closed captions for you? Because I can hear about every fourth word.
He turns it down because we get a hum or a buzz.
I got it.
Turns
Yeah,
it up,
I understand.
but he has to get the mic closer to him or something.
It's a technology issue, yeah. And this is not really well, how many of you first went to work for the federal government in 1965 and then 1970? Show of hands. And all right, yeah, I know. And so
depends on if you call military.
Yeah, so I won't mention names, but 30% of the federal workers that have been furloughed, laid off, whatever, are veterans. Well, I'm here to tell you, because I lived with the so-called retired Navy, 10% disability, guaranteed a job for life of veterans. And many of them, not all of them at all, some of them are the best workers on the planet. And some others just go in the door and say, you can't fire me. I'm going to sit here and take up space and become a double dipper. And that is what they do. So is there deadwood in the federal government? You better believe it. A ton of deadwood that needs to be cleared out. How you do that, I don't know. I just don't know.
Okay, well,
This is for David. David, these cameras cost about $50 with the microphone. So I'm just showing you that to kind of give you a tip.
I am truly willing to kick in $5 if I can get 9 people to match it, and I'll send him one. Yeah, happily.
well, okay.
I'd kind of like to see what David Grider looks like with closed ones.
It's noon, so we can conclude here. So
All right. I'll get together. I'm going to get together I have already got the videos for this, but I'll be doing some discussion about geothermal, basically using it for power supply. It's an energy thing.
Look forward to it.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thanks for the presentation, Warren.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Warren.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, it was good.